Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and welcome to another virus investigation video, ladies and gentlemen. This time we're actually focusing on a gaming console, I guess, trend of viruses, ladies and gentlemen. Basically, this series is where we cover the most malicious side of software on more than just your standard computer. Now, of course, as you all know, computers are not the only things that can get viruses. Last week we focused on Android viruses or smartphone viruses, just typically out of Minecraft or, things that have went latently free on the Google Play Store. But that is a whole subset of videos that will always happen, that will come as time goes on. We're going to focus more on Android devices and even iOS devices as time goes on. But today I wanted to sort of step back, take a chill pill, and focus on the PS Vita. So for those of you who don't know, the PlayStation Vita is a discontinued console. I know there's a lot of people who will say, the Vita is still alive and healthy. A few subset, and trust me, just because it has a couple Japanese visual novels kicking up on it doesn't exactly make it alive and healthy. It might have a heartbeat, but it's not exactly the best system ever when it comes to it's a live factor, so to speak. But again, I'm not here to shit talk the Vita. In fact, it's one of my favorite systems portable ever, and I have a video coming out for it later. In fact, some of the elements used in this video is actually from that one, so bear with me. Now, the PS Vita, I will teach you how to hack it when that video comes across. It's obviously about hacking the PS Vita. But the PS Vita is a system that has had an interesting modification history. And what we're about to discuss is not exactly something that you can do just with a Vita that's not hacked in the first place. So let's start talking about, sandboxing or, closed systems to begin with. Last week I focused on iOS being a closed system. And the reason why I say that's often a good thing in a minor way, it's not exactly the best thing. I do believe a system needs to be open, first of all, but the closed system does have one benefit, and that is a level of security that is always curated by the developer or the device owner, or rather the company themselves. In this case, it would be Sony, but in Apple's case, in iOS's case, it would be Apple. Now, of course, being a closed system, the avenues of freedom for the common end user limit themselves. Basically, you can't install an application unless Apple or Sony, in this case, would say so. But there is a benefit to that. In a very minor way, is that all those applications that are available on the App Store or available on, Sony's respective digital storefront are deemed okay and malware free, meaning that they're not going to harm you, your device, or your data personally if you download it from their stores. And if they do, Sony or Apple bear pretty much all responsibility. And there are reasons for that. Apple engineers or Apple, testers go through a lot of stuff when it comes to dealing with an application that you send out for review on the Apple storefront. It ends up becoming kind of a hassle sometimes. You might come up with the most tiniest of things that Apple wants you to change, then you got to resubmit an app and whatnot. It becomes kind of a clusterfuck. But for the end user, it means that you're pretty much safe. And if something does slip through the cracks, it's all Apple's fault. Or it's all Sony's fault in the Vita's case. So just a quick primer on closed systems, and in a small way why they can be beneficial for the end user and why they can't just choose to pin all the blame to their respective device manufacturer themselves. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is because what we're about to discuss is something that cannot happen if your PS Vita isn't hacked. Of course, if your PS Vita isn't hacked, all you're getting is digital purchases or digital downloads through the PlayStation Store anyways. So let's get over with hacking the PS Vita. It's had a pretty interesting hacking life itself. When the PS Vita first launched around that area, people were often toying with hacks such as VHBL or at times getting into the PlayStation portables, getting into the PSPE custom firmware, emulated custom firmware on the PS Vita device itself. That was the extent of hacking for a while. Basically, what would happen was there would be a cat and mouse type game with PS Vita hacking. Essentially, what would occur is people would buy PSP games, such as a real-life example would be Persona 2 Innocent Sin. Great game for the PSP. Amazing title. If you definitely want to play a dark Persona game, that's your game right there. But the part about that that's so interesting is that what would happen is a lot of these hacking communities for the Vita would release compromised save files, so that once you copy the save file to your Vita, whether it be through the PC or the PS3, you could launch that save data from the Persona 2 Innocent Sin that you bought off of the PS Vita storefront, and it would therefore trigger a bunch of hacks, a bunch of little glitches, a bunch of exploits, and that would launch you back to a PSP home screen, so to speak. So basically you had full access of the PSP emulator on the PS Vita. Now, this would allow you to play PSP games pretty perfectly for the most part, some PS1 titles that got improved as time went on, and pretty much all of the PSP's homebrew. So it was basically a modified PSP running with the OLED screen of the Vita, and it benefited from multiple sticks and whatnot. Was this a perfect solution? No, but for the time, a lot of people enjoyed it, so did I. I used to play Pokemon on it all the time. The OLED screen on the original PS Vita is beautiful. But there are limitations to it. You weren't able to get the full speed of the Vita. You had 333 megahertz of the PSP's emulating power, 32 megs of RAM at the most, and the GPU was running in parallel with what the PSP could do, which was far inferior to what the Vita was pulling off. But later on, as time went on, when firmware version 3.61 of the Vita was out, a software developer or a software reverse engineer by the name of, reverse engineers by the name of Yifan Liu. Yes, Yifan Liu, the person who had developed the vulnerability known as Henkaku, or ENSO now that it's called ENSO Henkaku, was a web-based exploit. Basically what had happened is if you were on this firmware, not below or not above, you were exactly at 3.61, you could go into your PS Vita's web browser and launch an exploit at henkaku.xyz, which is still up, and by running this exploit, basically what would happen is your Vita would be compromised through its web browser. Do never underestimate a web exploit. It's happened on a bunch of devices and people have let it slip by under the radar tons of times. What this would do is it would install it would basically compromise your system. It would be an untethered jailbreak, so to speak. Or sorry, a tethered jailbreak. I think that's a term for it. Basically, a tethered jailbreak is one that only runs in memory as the device is on. Once the device turns off and restarts, you have to go through the jailbreaks once again. So basically what would happen is you would install this jailbreak, it would come with a file browser, and you were able to have modified systems, modified emulators, modified games, pirated games even on the PS Vita once it was hacked. So as your PS Vita became a hacked system, you were able to install VPK files, which were basically package installations for Vita games or Vita programs. So if you wanted to install that shiny new Game Boy emulator or that Super Nintendo emulator, or if you wanted to play Doom for the 50 millionth time on any random hacked device, then you would have to install a VPK file. The problem with VPK files is this started a pretty nasty subset of Vita community owners that created VPK files that actually bricked your device so bad that you couldn't actually recover it unless you hard modded the device. Basically, unless you sent it to Sony, who would immediately know that you were modifying your system, you were shit out of luck. Let's get down to how this worked. Basically, the VPKs would release and people would title them things like Fruit Ninja. Basically any game really. It could be Uncharted, it could be Most Wanted. They would basically take common Vita games, pirated Vita games, because of course a big popular part of console hacking is the piracy aspect. They would release pirated versions of these games in VPK format and people would download them. And the thing is, upon installing them, they would basically compromise, brick out the device. Now of course I wasn't going to brick an actual PS Vita of mine, those things are fucking expensive, but I can describe to you how exactly this process works. See, the PS Vita, like I guess the PSP, sort of has a lot of its flash and boot stuff on different partitions, so to speak. Very Unix-like in a way. But basically, a lot of these hacked games had one thing in common. They were running on things such as MyDump, whatever you could call it, MAI dump or something like that, which was basically, I guess, a type of PS Vita backup for pirated games. Now, within MyDumps was a file called my.suprx, which was pretty much the profile, I guess you could say, if you wanted to sort of compare it to anything else, sort of like a profile for launching the game or installation directories, or just basically installing the VPK onto the actual device. So if you actually went into the hex editor, if you actually put these files into a goddamn hex editor to begin with, and you ran a search for OS0, VSH power request cold reset, VSH LO mount or IO mount, and if you got a result for any of these, if these showed up anywhere, it meant that your device could be compromised because these were permissions that the PS Vita was asking, or this program was asking for, that were something that it could never need, something that it really didn't have to touch. These were administrative requests the VPK was asking for, and if these requests were given, the PS Vita could literally be written down to the boot sector, I believe, or down to where its flash memory or OS memory is stored. And once that is completely wiped out, or zeroed out in this case, what would occur is your device not starting at all. You could not reinstall the device. You couldn't even go to a goddamn recovery mode that was on the Vita device to begin with. So essentially what you were left with was like a $300, $250 I believe was what the PS Vita cost. a $250 paperweight to begin with. So you could press power as much as you want, would never power on because, again, it could have no OS or recovery OS to even call back on. And of course, the only way to fix something like this was to hard mod the device or get down, open up the device, take out the goddamn motherboard unit, put in another motherboard unit, connect everything else, and be done with it. And at that point, you might as well just buy a brand new PS Vita to begin with, because guess what? You have to buy a new PS Vita unit anyways. And considering that new PS Vita units would come with newer firmware, guess what? You're shit out of luck. So again, how would you deal with it? It's just simply opening up VPKs, running them through a hex editor, and making sure they never contained any of these strings. Because as soon as they began with any of these strings, the moment you install this program and I guess attempt to run it, or it probably actually does it beforehand to begin with, you're going to lose every single bit of PS Vita ownership you've ever had. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, there were people who were creating malicious applications guised as popular games so people could brick their device. And of course, people can morally say that, you know, they're running pirated games anyways. Fuck those people, serves them right. It's kind of being an asshole to destroy somebody's $300 fucking device just because they decided to play Fruit Ninja on the PS Vita. Let's be honest here. But in the end, it is some moral issue that I guess people are divided on to this day. But for me, it's an interesting facet on a community that already had a pretty weird hacking situation to begin with, already tossed with a time where VPKs were uncertain to begin with. When I modded my PS Vita originally using Henkaku, I literally just did it so I could have the perfect SNES emulator on the go. When I looked at this kind of stuff, boy was I staying far away from any VPK to begin with. But ladies and gentlemen, that's just a facet of internet virus investigations to begin with. People create some of the weirdest programs, some of the weirdest malicious stuff on the weirdest of consoles at times too. And let's be honest, even consoles aren't free from this kind of stuff anyways. And as far as my research goes, there's still other bits of weird, odd, malicious code out there for multiple other handsets. I think there's even 3DS ransomware that exists out in the open. But ladies and gentlemen, just a virus investigation video on one of my favorite handheld systems really ever, containing malicious code, malicious console-destroying viruses or programs to begin with, whatever, it's a vague term. Ladies and gentlemen, let me know what you think about this. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.